Good morning, friends. I miss y'all so much, and I cannot wait till we are back together and that we are doing these lessons in person instead of through a screen. But that being said, I really am excited for today's lesson. This is one of my favorite chapters in Luke and some of my favorite stories, and I love how this author creatively weaved these stories into the theme of the table and the meal that we've been talking about. So let's just get started. So like I said, we're going to be in Luke chapter 14, and we're going to start in verse 1. So at the beginning of this chapter, we see that Jesus is around a table with some Pharisees. He's been invited to dinner, and it's the Sabbath. And so the Sabbath was important, and it's a key detail here, because the Sabbath was a day where no work was to be done whatsoever. It was a day reserved for resting in and remembering God's goodness. And Israel and the Jews kind of used it as a way to honor the work that God had done in rescuing them from Egypt. So, big deal for this group of people, and that's the fact that they weren't supposed to do any work. So this man comes by, and he has a crippled hand, and so Jesus gives up, and he responds by healing him. And so Jesus knew that this would have been iffy for the Pharisees, so before they can even say anything, he asked them, is it legal to heal on the Sabbath? And they don't answer him. These religious rulers who would have known the answer, they don't say anything at all. So Jesus continues and he says, if your ox or your son falls into a well, are you not going to save him? And he's asking this question because technically, by the letter of the law, the work required to get the tools and the effort required to lift that person out of the well would have been considered work. And so Jesus is kind of showing here, saying that sometimes the letter of the law isn't the spirit of the law. And so Jesus begins on this path to kind of show these religious rulers the great reversal that's in the kingdom of heaven. So he's going to tell 3 stories that all have to do about meals and a banquet to kind of show that God's kingdom isn't focused on keeping rules. It's not focused on following cultural expectations. Rather, the mission God has for his people is for us to love our neighbors. It's a mission of healing and restoring and redeeming. So let's look at these 3 stories to kind of show how Jesus is going to do this. The first story he tells is one of when you are invited to a banquet, don't come in and take the seat of honor. Right? In Jesus' day, where you sat at the table was a direct indication of your social status. And so where you sat showed how important you were. And so Jesus is saying, when you come to this table, when you come to the banquet, don't automatically take that most important seat. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So that's our first story. The second one that Jesus shares is that if you are a host of a dinner party, if you're hosting a banquet, don't just keep inviting your friends and your family and the rich who will repay you back by inviting you to another party. But instead, when you throw a party, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, because this is the way of God's kingdom. And lastly, our third story that Jesus tells is one of a host who invited all of his friends to this great banquet. And when the time came for the party and his servants went to go find the friends, all of them had these excuses of how they were too busy to come to the table. So the host says, fine, and tells his servant to instead go to the streets and go into the city and gather everyone he can find until his house is full. So he says, gather the poor and the lame and the crippled and fill my house with these people. So those are 3 stories that Jesus tells. And so they all come together in the way that Jesus is using these everyday examples to convey that God's kingdom is going to be full of the people that we're not expecting. Right? Around God's table, there's going to be the poor in spirit, the ones who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and that everyone gets invited to the table, and it's not just the religious ones who thought they were keeping all the rules, because that's not the mission God gave his people. And so if we go back to the interaction of Jesus healing the man on the Sabbath, Jesus shows us that the mission of the Pharisees and the teachers was to obey the law and keep all 600 something of them exactly. Their mission was to be right enough and good enough to earn salvation. And so Jesus tells these 3 meal stories to show that the social order has been flipped upside down by God, and that God's people are to be concerned about loving and caring for their neighbors and the marginalized, and they are to be a people who redeem and heal and renew. And so the mission of God and the mission of God's kingdom is about redemption and love and grace and compassion. And Jesus shows us that we can use meals to enact this mission. So, what exactly do we mean when we say mission? Mission is our purpose. It's what we're trying to do, and it's who we're trying to be, and it's the way that we have said that we want to live. Often we hear this today in the context of a mission statement. So businesses and companies have mission statements. For example, Google says that their mission statement is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. That feels to me like what Google does. Kickstarter says that their mission statement is to bring creative projects to life. Life is Good says that their mission statement is to spread the power of optimism. And so from these three companies, you can kind of see that mission statements kind of tell us what this company is trying to do. I think there's another mission statement that hopefully we're all familiar with, and that is our church's mission statement. We say that OP Church is joining in the work of Jesus for the good of the world. And so what does OP Church want to be, and who do we want to be known for in our community? Well, we want to be a church and a people who join in the work of Jesus, who join in the work of healing and compassion, and the work of grace and the work of love. And we do this for the sake of our neighbors and our city and our world so that they can know more of God's love for them. And so I think OP Church has followed Jesus in using meals to enact mission in some really creative ways already. Thinking about IHN, multiple times a year we help local churches provide housing and meals to individuals and families in our community who are looking for permanent and sustainable housing and income. OP Church participates in missional meals, right? It's in the title. Our church provides meals to students and families so they can focus and learn at school without being distracted by hunger pains. Every year at Thanksgiving and Christmas, our caring ministry provides hundreds of meals to our community. And I mentioned this last time we talked, but at Surf City, we started eating breakfast every day with community members who don't have secure housing at cross lines. So we know firsthand that meals enact mission around here, right? We've seen the power that sharing a meal has when it comes to offering love and compassion. And so when Jesus tells us to fill our homes and our tables with those in need, we know what that looks like. And so clearly, I think that we've already started practicing Jesus' message here, but I still think there's lots of room for us to learn. Because part of mission is the why behind the mission, right? And there's lots of reasons why we could share a meal with someone. And if we're being honest and our hearts look a little more like the Pharisees, we could say that we share a meal because it's a good thing to do and it makes us feel good to help others. If our hearts are looking a little more like the Pharisees, we can say that we help out packing meals at missional meals because we need more NHS credits. We could go purchase a box of food at Thanksgiving because we know we're supposed to tithe at least 10% of our income, and we can do that by purchasing this food. This is where it gets tricky because these things that we're doing, they're all good things, right? Volunteering and providing food and meals are good things. They aren't inherently bad. But I think Jesus would have also told the Pharisees that the law wasn't inherently bad either, right? It's the motive and it's the why and it's our heart that makes things mixed up. So here's a quote from our book that I think is helpful here. Jesus didn't run projects. Jesus didn't establish ministries. He didn't create programs or put on events. He ate meals. And if you routinely share meals and have a passion for Jesus, you'll be doing mission, right? We share meals because we have a passion for Jesus and a passion for his people, right? That's our why behind our mission. So I want to leave us with a challenge this week. As a family, how are you going to use a meal to enact OP Church's mission of joining in the work of Jesus for the good of the world? How are you going to join God's mission of redeeming and healing and restoring all of creation? I have a few tangible ideas for you. I want you to be creative as a family, but here's maybe some starting places. One, what would it look like for your family to ask a neighbor that you don't know if y'all could have a social distancing driveway dinner party? Just start a relationship with your neighbors. Two, I'm recording this on Thursday, and as of today, Barefoot Missions still need 9 more freezer meals for the next 2 weeks. So that's the 14th and the 21st. So what would it look like for all of OP Youth to fill those 9 spots? IHN is being hosted by OP in the next 2 weeks, and they need meals. They need people to provide meals. So could your family prepare a meal for IHN? And so over these last 2, since we can't physically be around a table with the people that we're sharing this meal with, what does it look like for your family to pray over these meals before you deliver them? What does it look like to pray for the people who will be receiving them and pray for the leaders of IHN and Barefoot? Right? How can you cover these meals with the goodness of God before it ever leaves your home? So my only discussion question for you this week is, how are you going to be creative? How are you going to use a meal to enact the mission of God's love and care for our neighbors? So as we wrap up, my prayer for you this week is that the Spirit is creatively leading you to find ways for a meal to be a visual representation of your heart. So, see y'all later.